Everyone laughed when the female veteran paid $1 for a massive, pregnant mare no one else wanted. Hours later, under a single heat lamp, the horse collapses in labor. The vet notices shaved marks, rope scars, signs someone tried to hide her past. Then the foal starts to come out and suddenly the vet turns pale, because what this mare is about to give birth to was never meant to be found. At 2:13 a.m., the barn felt less like a shelter and more like a confession. A single heat lamp burned above the foaling stall, its dull orange light barely pushing back the cold darkness pressing in through the wooden boards. Winter air slipped through every crack. Breath turned to fog. The straw beneath the mare had already been soaked dark with sweat. Magnolia went down hard, not the slow, careful lowering of an animal surrendering to instinct. She collapsed like something pushed past the final limit of strength. Her knees folded. Her shoulder struck the bedding. The massive draft mare trembled violently, sides heaving, every breath jagged and uneven. She should have been magnificent. Huge frame, thick winter coat, the kind of strength that once pulled wagons and plows across miles of land. But tonight she looked broken. Riley Hart was already on her knees beside her. "Easy," she whispered, though her own hands trembled. "Easy, girl. I'm right here." Her voice carried the calm of someone trained to speak steadily even when the rest of the body had already confessed the truth. Riley's palm rested against Magnolia's neck, feeling the frantic pulse under the skin. Too fast. Much too fast. Outside the stall, hurried footsteps echoed down the barn aisle. A door slammed. A latch clanged open. Dr. Naomi Kessler stepped inside carrying 2 medical bags, her breath cutting white in the freezing air. She had been called out of bed less than 20 minutes ago. Her coat was thrown over scrubs. Her hair was pulled into a hurried knot beneath a wool cap. She took one look at Magnolia and stopped. "No," she muttered under her breath. Riley looked up immediately. "How bad?" Naomi was already moving. Gloves snapped over her hands as she knelt beside the mare, eyes scanning quickly across Magnolia's body. Too much sweat, too much strain, too much exhaustion for a mare that should still have some strength left. "This isn't right," Naomi said quietly. Magnolia groaned, the sound low and desperate, and kicked weakly against the straw. Riley leaned closer, speaking softly near the mare's ear. "It's okay. You're okay. Stay with me." But Magnolia's body was shaking harder now. Naomi reached up to push the tangled mane away from the mare's neck. Then she froze. Her fingers slowly parted the thick hair again, searching carefully this time. Under the mane, just behind the crest of the neck, was a patch where the coat had been shaved unevenly, not trimmed neatly the way a veterinarian would prepare skin for treatment. It was jagged, rushed, like someone had tried to remove something quickly and hoped no one would notice. Riley saw it, too. "What is that?" Naomi didn't answer right away. Instead, her hand moved along Magnolia's shoulder, pressing gently through the coat. Beneath the hair were older marks, half-healed abrasions, faded rope scars, patches of skin rubbed raw long ago and never fully restored. Transport scars, restraint marks. The body of the mare told a quiet story of being moved, controlled, handled rougher than any animal deserved. Naomi exhaled slowly. "Someone didn't just neglect her," she murmured. Her voice dropped lower. "Someone tried to erase her." The words settled into the stall like a weight. Magnolia groaned again, louder this time. Her body tightened as another contraction rolled through her, every muscle locking with effort. Naomi snapped back into motion. "I need more light." Riley grabbed the portable work lamp leaning against the stall wall and dragged it closer. The beam spilled across Magnolia's hindquarters, illuminating the wet straw and the tremor running through the mare's massive frame.
We're here to help
Naomi
you now.
leaned forward. Then she nodded once. The foal's crowning. For the first time that night, Riley felt a flicker of relief. Maybe this would still work. Maybe Magnolia was just exhausted. Maybe the night would end the way thousands of foaling nights had ended before, messy, frightening, but ultimately safe. Magnolia strained again. 2 small hooves appeared first, then a dark nose. "Come on," Riley whispered softly. "You're almost there." The mare pushed with everything she had left. The foal slid free in a rush of steam and fluid, landing in the straw beside Naomi's hands. A small colt, slick with birth and shivering in the cold air. For a moment, the entire barn seemed to hold its breath. Naomi cleared the colt's nose quickly and rubbed hard with a towel. The foal coughed, then inhaled. A thin, shaky first breath.
Just breathe.
Riley exhaled in relief she hadn't realized she'd been holding.
I don't like the sound of that
"Alive,"
cough.
she breathed. But Magnolia didn't relax. Instead, the mare let out a raw cry that echoed against the wooden walls. Naomi's head snapped up instantly. "No?" Riley frowned. "What?" But Magnolia's body answered before Naomi could. Another contraction seized her, harder than the first. The mare strained again, legs kicking weakly against the straw, her massive ribs expanding and collapsing in panicked bursts of air. Naomi rose slightly onto her knees, eyes narrowing. "This isn't over." Riley's stomach dropped. Magnolia pushed again, and again. The colt beside them twitched weakly in the straw, still trying to understand the world he had just entered. But Magnolia wasn't finished. Riley stared at Naomi, dread creeping in. "What's happening?" Naomi finally looked at her. Her expression had gone pale. "If this is what I think it is," she said quietly, "your mare is carrying twins." The words landed like ice. Twin births in horses were rare, dangerous, often fatal. Magnolia trembled beneath Riley's hand, her strength fading even as the contractions continued to build. Outside, the winter wind slammed against the barn walls hard enough to rattle the tin roof. Inside, under the weak glow of a single heat lamp, the giant mare fought for another life that was trying to enter a world already stacked against it. Naomi grabbed another towel, another pair of gloves. Then she said something that made the cold feel even deeper. "Riley." Her voice was tight now. "If this is what I think it is, somebody expected her to die before anyone could look too closely." Riley looked down at Magnolia's exhausted face. The mare's dark eye rolled toward her. And suddenly Riley understood something she hadn't wanted to admit since the moment this animal arrived in her barn. This wasn't just a difficult birth. This was evidence. Someone had hidden this mare, moved her, damaged her, then dumped her into an auction where nobody would ask questions. Someone had expected nature to finish the job. Magnolia shuddered again beneath Riley's hand. Another contraction began. And Riley realized, with a clarity sharp enough to hurt, that whatever truth was buried inside this mare's story, it was about to come into the world whether anyone was ready for it or not. Morning arrived slowly over the valley, pale winter light stretching across frozen pasture and quiet dirt roads. But Riley Hart had already been awake for hours. Sleep rarely stayed long in her house. The small rental at the edge of town held a kind of silence that seemed peaceful to strangers. No television noise, no music, no voices drifting from other rooms. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of an old wall clock that had outlived better days. Riley stood at the kitchen sink with a mug of black coffee warming her hands. Outside the window, frost clung to the wooden fence rails and the thin pasture grass beyond them. Most mornings looked exactly like this. Simple, quiet, predictable. That was the point. Routine kept the noise inside her head from getting too loud. She took a slow sip of coffee and stared out across the yard, where Magnolia's stall door was barely visible through the early light. The mare had survived the night, but barely. The foaling stall still smelled faintly of sweat, straw, and something deeper, something older. Pain. Riley set the mug down and rolled up the sleeve of her flannel shirt. The scar ran along the inside of her forearm. a long, pale line where skin had been opened and stitched closed again years ago. The edges had healed smooth, but the memory beneath it had never quite settled. She traced the line once with her thumb. Some scars were loud. They came with stories people told at dinner tables or around campfires, the kind that made listeners lean forward. Others stayed quiet. They lived under sleeves, beneath collars, inside bones, the kind of scars that didn't need witnesses to keep hurting. Riley lowered her arm slowly. Last night, when Naomi had brushed Magnolia's mane aside and exposed that shaved patch beneath the mare's neck, something inside Riley had tightened in a way she recognized immediately. It wasn't just concern for the animal, it was recognition. The mare's body had been telling the same quiet story. Marks that had been hidden, damage that had been dismissed, pain that someone hoped no one would ask about. Some scars were meant to close, others were meant to be hidden. Riley pulled her sleeve back down and stepped away from the sink. The kitchen table held a small stack of unopened mail. Bills, flyers, local advertisements. One envelope lay beneath them all. White, official. The corner carried the seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs. It had been sitting there for nearly 2 months. Riley had never opened it. She slid the stack aside and picked up the envelope, turning it slowly between her fingers. Inside was probably another appointment reminder, another invitation to join another support program, another suggestion that healing could be scheduled between breakfast and lunch like a dentist appointment. She set the envelope back down. Healing, in Riley's experience, didn't work that way. A faint sound drifted through the open kitchen window. Horse movement. A quiet shift of hooves on straw. Riley stepped onto the back porch and crossed the yard toward the barn. The cold air bit through her flannel shirt immediately, but she barely noticed. Inside the stall, Magnolia stood resting on trembling legs. The mare looked even larger in daylight, and even more tired. The colt lay curled in fresh bedding near the stall wall, his thin legs folded awkwardly beneath him as he slept. His breathing was shallow but steady. Riley leaned against the wooden gate and watched them both for a moment. "Morning," she said softly. Magnolia flicked one ear toward her voice. The mare's dark eye followed Riley's movement with cautious attention. Not wild, not aggressive, just careful. Animals that had been hurt often learned the same language.
Are you serious?
Riley stepped inside slowly and poured fresh water into the bucket. Magnolia lowered her head and drank deeply, like water itself was a rare gift. Behind Riley, a phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She almost ignored it, but the vibration came again, and again. She pulled the phone out and glanced at the screen. Cal Mercer. Riley sighed and answered. "You're up early," she said. "Been up all night," Cal replied. His voice carried the rough exhaustion of someone who had spent hours inside a fire truck or ambulance. Volunteer shift ran long. "You okay?" "Yeah." There was a pause. Then Cal said, "You remember that horse auction I mentioned yesterday?" Riley leaned against the stall rail, eyes still on Magnolia. "Yeah." "Well," Cal continued slowly, "I drove past the fairgrounds this morning. They're already hauling animals in." "That's normal." "This one isn't." Riley waited. Cal exhaled quietly on the other end of the line. "There's a mare in there," he said. "Big draft horse, pregnant, and people are already talking like she's dead." Riley frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean the buyers are laughing," Cal said. "They're betting on how long she'll last in the ring before she drops." Riley's gaze shifted back to Magnolia. The mare lifted her head slowly from the water bucket, droplets falling from her muzzle. Cal's voice came again. "She doesn't look mean, doesn't look dangerous, just tired." Riley felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the same instinct that had gotten her into trouble more than once during her years in uniform. See a problem. Step in. Fix it. She forced the feeling down. "That's not my problem," she said quietly. "Yeah," Cal replied. Another pause followed. Then he added, Didn't think you'd say yes." Riley stared at Magnolia. The mare's ribs expanded slowly with each breath. Her coat was rough. Her body carried marks that shouldn't exist on any animal treated with basic care. And suddenly Riley could almost hear another sound layered over the quiet barn. A crowd. Laughter. A tired horse standing under bright lights while strangers made jokes about how quickly it might die. Riley closed her eyes briefly, then she opened them again. "Where's the auction?" she asked. Cal chuckled softly. "County Fairgrounds. What time?" "Starts in an hour." Riley ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She stood in the stall doorway for another long moment. Then she muttered to herself, almost annoyed, "I'm not getting involved." Magnolia watched her with quiet, patient eyes. Riley grabbed her jacket from the hook near the barn door. 5 minutes later, her truck engine started in the driveway, and by the time the sun fully cleared the hills, Riley Hart was already halfway down the road toward the county auction. Because sometimes the hardest promise to keep was the one you made to yourself about walking away. By the time Riley Hart pulled into the county fairgrounds, the morning had already turned loud. Pickup trucks crowded the gravel lot. Horse trailers sat in long, crooked rows, their metal sides dull beneath a weak winter sun. Men in work jackets stood in clusters near the entrance, coffee in one hand, opinions in the other. Somewhere inside the livestock barn, a gate slammed hard enough to shake dust loose from the rafters. The place smelled like hay, diesel, wet leather, manure, and old money. Not wealth, transaction. That colder kind of money that knew how to measure a living creature by the pound, the pedigree, the risk, the resale. Riley cut the engine and sat still for half a second. This was why she usually stayed away from places like this. Not because she was afraid of rough people. She had known rougher. Not because she couldn't handle cruelty. She had seen worse. But because auctions like this had a way of making indifference feel normal. They turned suffering into routine, into background noise, into entertainment wearing a practical face. She stepped out of the truck anyway. The cold bit through her jacket as she crossed the lot. Her boots crunched over frozen gravel. Somewhere ahead, a loudspeaker crackled with static, and an auctioneer's voice rolled through the barn in fast, practiced bursts. Inside, the noise hit all at once. Metal rattled, cattle bawled, horses shifted in their pens. Boots scraped across concrete. A child laughed. Someone shouted a bid. Another man laughed too hard at nothing, and above it all floated the strange energy that only gathered in places where people came to watch value rise and fall in public. Riley moved down the aisle slowly, shoulders tense, eyes scanning each pen. Then she saw the phones. A few people weren't watching the ring the way buyers watched. They were holding their phones half raised, grinning at something ahead, waiting for a moment worth recording. That was never a good sign. She followed their line of sight, and there Magnolia stood. Even in a crowded sale ring, she looked enormous. A massive draft mare, broad through the chest, tall at the shoulder, built from the kind of old workhorse bloodlines that once moved fields and freight and families. But now that size only made her condition harder to look at. Her winter coat was rough and dull. The faint line of her ribs showed beneath the thickness of her body. Her ankles looked swollen. Her halter was too cheap, too tight, cutting into the skin along her face. And still, for all the damage, there was nothing wild in her eyes. Only exhaustion. She stood under the bright auction lights with her head lowered and one hind leg cocked weakly beneath her, as if she were trying to take weight off a body that had run out of places to carry pain. Riley felt her jaw tighten. A teenage boy stood near the ring gate with a water bucket in one hand. Skinny. Ball cap pulled low. Coat too light for the weather. He glanced around once, then edged closer and slid the bucket near Magnolia's mouth when nobody important seemed to be looking. The mare drank immediately, not greedily, desperately, like the act itself had become embarrassing. The boy stepped back fast after that, as if kindness might cost him his job. Riley moved toward him. "What's her story?" The kid flinched before he answered, not because Riley had sounded harsh, because he had learned to brace first and speak second. "I don't know," he muttered. Riley looked at the mare again. "That's not true." The boy's eyes flicked toward the far side of the ring, toward a man in a clean jacket and polished boots who was laughing with two buyers near the rail. "Not much," the boy said quietly. "They brought her in late. Said she was trouble." Riley's eyes narrowed. "She doesn't look mean." The kid swallowed. Then, almost under his breath, he said, "She isn't." That was the first honest thing Riley had heard since she entered the building. "What's your name?" she asked. "Wyatt." "You work here, Wyatt?" He nodded once. Riley looked back at Magnolia. "Pregnant." Wyatt hesitated. Then he gave the slightest nod. A burst of laughter broke out near the rail. The polished man had turned toward the crowd now. Late 40s, hair trimmed close, smile easy. The kind of man who wore friendliness like a rented jacket. Good enough from a distance, wrong up close. Dale Rusk. He spread his hands toward Magnolia as if presenting a joke everybody had already agreed to. "There she is, folks," he called. "Biggest money pit in 3 counties. A few people chuckled. "Old," Dale went on. "Mean, hard mouth, hard feet, hard luck. And before anybody asks, yes, she's bred, but I wouldn't call that a blessing." More laughter. Riley watched his face while he spoke. The smile was polished. The tone was casual, but the eyes told a different story. They kept moving. To the doors, to the crowd, to the auctioneer, to Magnolia. Then back again. Not confidence, calculation. He wasn't in control. He was managing panic and hoping nobody noticed. Wyatt leaned closer to Riley, voice barely audible. "He wants her gone." "Why?" Wyatt shook his head. "I don't know, but he was yelling before the sale. Said she couldn't stay another day." Riley felt something cold settle under her ribs. Dale kept talking, turning the mare's suffering into patter. "She's too old to work right, too expensive to fix, and too big to be worth the headache. So, let's save everybody some time." He slapped the rail lightly and grinned at the crowd. "Meat price only." The phrase landed ugly. Magnolia lifted her head at the sound of his voice. Just a little. Enough for Riley to see the dull shine in her eyes under the lights. Not defiant, not broken either, just tired in a way that made laughter feel obscene. The auctioneer, eager to keep the line moving, rattled off the start. "Who'll give me 200? 200, now 150, 150, 100. Nothing. Buyers shifted but didn't lift a hand. Everyone could see the risk. A heavily pregnant mare in poor condition. A possible vet bill. A possible dead foal. A possible public mess. Money liked odds. This wasn't good odds. The auctioneer dropped again. 75? Nothing. Dale's smile stayed in place, but Riley could see the crack now. A stiffness around the mouth. The edge of sweat at his temple despite the cold. Because this was not how he expected the room to behave. He needed the mare gone quickly. Not because she was worthless, because she was dangerous. A horse in that condition, carrying that much risk, could collapse in the wrong trailer, at the wrong facility, in front of the wrong veterinarian. One proper scan. One official eye. One person asking the wrong question at the right time, and whatever Dale Rusk had buried beneath dirt, fear, and a shaved patch under the mane might start crawling back into daylight. He didn't need a buyer. He needed disappearance. The auctioneer called again. 50? Still nothing. People muttered. One man smirked and said, "She'll foal in the trailer." Another answered, "If she makes it that far." More laughter. Wyatt looked down at the concrete. Riley felt the muscles in her neck go hard. Dale lifted one shoulder as though he were magnanimous enough to mock his own loss. "All right," he said. $1. Anyone brave?" Brave. That was how he framed it. Not cruel, not convenient, not gutless, brave. As if leaving a suffering animal to vanish into slaughter were just common sense, and mercy were the reckless thing. The room quieted in a different way then. Not respectful silence. Curious silence. The kind that comes when people think they may be about to witness either generosity or stupidity and aren't sure which will be funnier. Riley looked at Magnolia. The mare stood perfectly still beneath the lights, belly heavy, ankles swollen, breath slow and strained. For one moment she turned her head just enough for Riley to see the halter rubbing raw at the cheek. And something inside Riley made its decision before the rest of her could argue. Her hand went up. Just once. Not dramatic. Not hesitant either. A single, clear motion. The auctioneer pointed immediately. Sold. $1. A few people laughed. Somebody actually clapped. Riley barely heard them. She was looking at Dale, and Dale was looking at her. For the first time since she had walked in, his smile disappeared completely. Not because he had lost money, because he had lost control. He studied Riley in one fast, searching glance jacket, posture, expression, the steadiness in her face. He understood something in that instant that the others did not. She was not a slaughter buyer. She was not a reseller. She was not a fool chasing a bargain. She looked like the kind of woman who would take the mare home, call a vet, ask questions, and keep asking when the answers came back wrong. The first crack in his composure showed at the corner of his mouth. Small, but real. He stepped toward her as the crowd started to turn away, already bored now that the joke had ended. "You sure about that?" he asked lightly. Riley held his gaze. "Looks like I am." Dale gave a thin chuckle that never reached his eyes. "She's more trouble than she's worth." Riley glanced toward Magnolia. "That seems to bother you more than me." For half a second, something hard flashed through his face. Then it was gone. Wyatt reached for the lead rope with shaking hands. Riley saw the boy look at her the way people looked at locked doors that had unexpectedly opened. Magnolia lowered her head as Riley approached. Up close, the mare smelled of cold air, sweat, stress, and neglect. Riley took the rope. The skin beneath the cheap halter was warm. Too warm. "Come on, girl," she said softly. Magnolia didn't resist. She only hesitated once at the edge of the ring, as if even she had learned that moving from one set of hands to another rarely meant safety. Then she followed. Behind them, Riley could feel Dale watching. Not angry, yet. Worse, afraid. Because he had brought a living secret into a public place and expected the world to finish his work for him. Instead, for $1, that secret had just walked out alive. And somewhere behind the polished smile and easy lies, Dale Rusk understood the same thing Riley was only beginning to suspect. This mare had not been sold. She had been escaped. Magnolia's trailer door closed with a hollow metallic thud that echoed through Riley Hart's chest. The county fairgrounds faded behind her truck as she pulled onto the narrow rural highway. Winter fields stretched on both sides, frozen grass, bare trees, long fences that disappeared into pale morning fog. In the rearview mirror, Magnolia stood quietly in the trailer. Too quietly. Most horses shifted during transport, stomped, adjusted their weight, complained about the movement. Magnolia did none of those things. She stood like an animal conserving every ounce of strength she had left. Riley kept her speed low. The drive back to her small property outside town took 20 minutes. 20 minutes that felt longer than they should have. Because the deeper Riley's mind wandered into what she had just done, the heavier the questions became. A $1 horse, a pregnant draft mare in terrible condition, a seller who looked relieved the moment she left the ring, and terrified the moment Riley raised her hand. Something about that entire auction had felt wrong. Not strange. Wrong. By the time Riley turned down her gravel driveway, the sky had brightened enough to show frost glittering across the pasture fence. She parked near the barn and opened the trailer carefully. Magnolia didn't rush out. She stepped down slowly, carefully placing each massive hoof as if the ground itself might betray her. When her weight finally settled fully onto the frozen dirt, her legs trembled. Riley led her into the barn. Inside, the air smelled of fresh straw and clean wood. The stall had been prepared the night before after the difficult foaling that had already changed everything. Magnolia stepped inside and stopped. For a moment, she simply stood there, breathing. Then Riley watched something small but important happen. The mare lowered her head and drank from the water bucket. Not cautiously, not suspiciously. Deep, steady gulps, like water was something she had been denied long enough to miss. Riley leaned on the stall gate, watching quietly. "That bad, huh?" she murmured. Magnolia didn't answer, of course, but the way the mare kept drinking told Riley enough. Behind her, the barn door creaked open. Dr. Naomi Kessler stepped inside carrying a medical case and a portable scanner. "You made it back alive," Naomi said. "Barely." Naomi's eyes traveled immediately to Magnolia, studying the mare's posture, breathing, and weight distribution. "She's worse than I thought," Naomi muttered. Magnolia flicked an ear toward the sound of her voice but didn't shy away. That alone told Naomi something important. Animals that had been treated brutally often reacted to humans in predictable ways: panic, aggression, complete shutdown. Magnolia showed none of those, just caution. Naomi stepped closer and ran a gentle hand along the mare's neck. "That shaved patch you saw last night," Riley said. "Still think it's hiding something?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pulled a small handheld scanner from her bag. "Let's find out." She switched the device on. A faint electronic hum filled the stall. Naomi passed the scanner slowly along Magnolia's neck. Nothing. She moved it down the shoulder. Still nothing. Riley frowned. "No chip?" "Should be one," Naomi said quietly. She passed the scanner again across the same area where the hair had been shaved. Silence. Naomi stepped back. "That's strange." Riley crossed her arms against the cold. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Naomi said slowly. "This mare carries herself like a horse that once had papers. Draft breeding, old working bloodlines. Horses like that usually get chipped." She turned the scanner off. Then she reached back into her medical case and pulled out a second device. This one looked older, bulkier, a tool most rural vets didn't bother carrying anymore. Riley raised an eyebrow. "Backup plan." Naomi smiled faintly. "Old chips don't always talk to new scanners." She switched the second reader on. The device gave off a faint, intermittent beep as Naomi moved it slowly across Magnolia's neck. Nothing. Then, a soft, electronic chirp. Both women froze. Naomi moved the scanner again, slower this time. Another faint signal. "There." "Got you," Naomi murmured. The scanner beeped again, weak but persistent, like a voice buried beneath layers of time. Riley leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Naomi read the small display screen. Her expression changed. "What?" Riley asked. Naomi looked up. "This horse isn't a nobody." She turned the screen so Riley could see. On the digital display was a registered identification line. Magnolia's Promise reported missing 8 months ago. Riley stared at the screen. The name felt heavier than it should have. Magnolia's Promise. A horse with a name like that didn't start life in a slaughter pipeline. "Someone reported her stolen," Naomi continued quietly. "From a property about 2 counties north." Riley exhaled slowly. "So Dale knew." Naomi nodded. "He had to." Because if the horse had been scanned anywhere official vet clinic, transport checkpoint, even a livestock inspection, the chip would have eventually spoken, and that meant questions. Riley leaned against the stall rail again. "So he dumps her at an auction for $1, she said slowly. Naomi nodded again. Because he thinks she'll disappear into slaughter before anyone bothers to check. Magnolia lifted her head slightly as if sensing the tension in the air. The mare's dark eye turned toward Riley. Calm, tired, but aware. Behind them, outside the barn, tires rolled slowly across gravel. Both women turned toward the sound. Through the open doorway, Riley saw a black pickup truck creep past the end of her driveway. The truck didn't stop, but it didn't drive fast either. It rolled past slowly enough for someone inside to study the barn. Then it disappeared down the road. Riley's jaw tightened. Naomi noticed. "You expecting visitors?" "No." Riley pulled her phone from her pocket. A new message had arrived. Unknown number. 2 short sentences. "You bought trouble. Take her back." Riley looked at Magnolia again. At the mare's tired eyes, at the swollen legs, at the life still growing inside that battered body. Then she slipped the phone back into her pocket. "Too late," she said quietly. Because the moment that scanner had beeped, this was no longer just a rescue. Now it was evidence. The trouble arrived before the afternoon ended. Riley Hart had barely finished repairing the stall gate when gravel crunched slowly outside the barn. Not the quick arrival of a neighbor, not the uneven stop of a delivery truck. This vehicle rolled in carefully, deliberately, like someone who already believed they belonged there. Riley stepped out of the stall and moved toward the barn door. The black pickup she had seen earlier sat in the driveway now, engine still running. Dust swirled lazily behind it. A man stepped out. Dale Rusk closed the truck door with a calm, casual motion, brushing imaginary dirt from the sleeve of his jacket as if he had simply stopped by to check on a friend. The same polished smile appeared on his face, but now Riley could see the edges of it more clearly. Thin, careful, like it had been practiced in a mirror. "Well," Dale said pleasantly as he walked toward the barn, "looks like she made the trip." Riley leaned against the stall door, arms crossed. "Looks like she did." Dale glanced past her into the stall. Magnolia stood quietly in the straw, her head lowered over the water bucket. For a brief moment, something flickered in Dale's eyes. Not concern, calculation. Then the smile returned. "Listen," he said easily, "I figured I'd stop by and clean up a little misunderstanding." Riley didn't move. "What misunderstanding?" Dale slipped his hands into his coat pockets, rocking slightly on his heels like a man discussing weather. "That mare," he said. "She was supposed to go somewhere else." "Funny," Riley replied. "The auctioneer seemed pretty clear." Dale chuckled. "Paperwork gets messy sometimes. Wrong pen, wrong listing, wrong buyer." Riley watched him carefully. This wasn't anger. This was pressure, the kind that arrived smiling. "So, what are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying," Dale continued smoothly, "that I'll give you your $1 back." He pulled a folded stack of bills from his pocket. And then some. He held the money out between 2 fingers. A casual offer, like he expected the entire problem to disappear in exchange for a little convenience. Riley didn't even look at it. "She's not for sale." The smile twitched. "Now, let's not get stubborn," Dale said lightly. "You don't want the trouble that comes with that horse." Behind Riley, Magnolia shifted her weight. The wooden stallboards creaked. Dale's eyes flicked toward the movement instantly. There it was again. Fear. Small, but real. "You seem pretty concerned about where she ends up," Riley said quietly. Dale's eyes returned to her. His voice dropped half a tone. "You don't know what you bought." "Actually," Riley said, "I'm starting to." The silence between them thickened. Dale's smile faded another fraction. "You don't want a legal mess," he said. Riley raised an eyebrow. "And what kind of mess would that be?" "The kind where paperwork says that horse belongs to someone else." Riley let that sentence hang. Then she said calmly, "Funny thing about paperwork." Dale's eyes narrowed slightly. Yeah? Sometimes it remembers things people try to forget. The words landed exactly where she wanted them to. For the first time since he arrived, Dale's posture stiffened. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "You think you're clever," he said quietly. "I think you're nervous." A truck door slammed somewhere down the road. Wind rattled the barn siding. Neither of them moved. Then Magnolia's legs buckled. It happened fast. The giant mare's front knees folded without warning, her massive body dropping forward into the straw with a heavy thud that shook the stall boards. Riley spun instantly. Magnolia! The mare struggled, legs scrambling weakly against the bedding as another contraction twisted through her exhausted body. She tried to rise, failed. Her sides heaved violently. Behind Riley, Dale stepped closer. "Well," he said coldly, "looks like your problem might solve itself." Riley turned so fast the motion startled him. "Don't." The single word carried enough force to stop him in his tracks. "You don't get to touch her," she said. Dale's eyes hardened. "That horse is my property." "Not anymore." Another contraction seized Magnolia. The mare groaned, her head tossing weakly as her body fought something bigger than strength alone could solve. At that moment, another truck tore into the driveway. Dr. Naomi Kessler jumped out before the engine finished dying, medical bag already in her hand. She rushed into the barn. "What happened?" "Collapsed," Riley said quickly. "Contractions again." Naomi dropped beside Magnolia immediately. Her hands moved fast, checking position, breathing, muscle response. Then Naomi looked up. "This is bad," she said. Dale crossed his arms. "So, take her back to the auction yard," he said flatly. "Not my problem anymore." Naomi's eyes flashed. "If we move her right now," she snapped, "she and both foals will die in the trailer." Dale shrugged. "That's livestock." The words hung in the cold air. Riley felt something inside her lock into place. Not anger, not panic, decision. Naomi wiped her hands on a towel and stood. "We need time," she said. Riley nodded once. Behind them, Dale pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto a nearby workbench. The paper slapped loudly against the wood. "Then read that," he said. Riley stepped over and opened it. Inside was a legal notice. Property claim. Demand for immediate return. Threat of seizure. Riley looked up slowly. Dale's smile had returned. But now it held teeth. "You see," he said quietly, "this can get complicated." Magnolia groaned again behind them. Riley folded the document carefully. Then she set it back down. "You're right," she said. Dale tilted his head slightly. "I usually am." Riley turned back toward the stall, placing her hand gently against Magnolia's trembling neck. The mare's breath shuddered beneath her palm. And in that moment, Riley finally understood something clearly. Dale Rusk wasn't angry. He wasn't greedy. He was afraid. Afraid of what Magnolia's survival might prove. Riley looked back at him, and her voice came out calm. "You're not worried about the horse." Dale said nothing. Riley held his gaze. "You're worried about what happens if she lives." Night settled over Riley Hart's property like a heavy blanket. The wind had died down, leaving the countryside strangely still. Frost crept slowly across the pasture fences, silver under the pale glow of a rising moon. Inside the barn, the only light came from the same heat lamp that had burned through the night before. Magnolia stood in fresh straw. Barely. The giant mare's legs trembled with exhaustion, but she had not gone down again. Every few minutes she shifted her weight slowly, carefully, as if her body were balancing pain on a knife edge. Riley sat in a folding chair beside the stall. She had not changed clothes, had not gone inside. The coffee in the thermos beside her had gone cold hours ago. But she didn't move. Not tonight. Not after what Dale had left on the workbench. The legal notice sat there still, its crisp white envelope glowing faintly in the lamplight. Property claim. Demand for return. Threat of seizure. Riley had read it twice. Then she stopped reading. Because the words themselves weren't the problem. The problem was the man behind them. Across the stall, Magnolia lowered her head and nudged the water bucket gently. Riley stood and stepped closer. "Easy," she murmured. The mare drank slowly this time. Carefully, like every swallow had to be negotiated with her body. Behind Riley, the barn door creaked open. Dr. Naomi Kessler stepped inside again, shoulders dusted with frost. "Any change?" she asked quietly. Riley shook her head. "Still standing." Naomi walked over to the stall and watched Magnolia for a moment. The mare's breathing was uneven but steady. Her muscles twitched occasionally beneath the coat. The swollen belly shifted slightly with the slow movement of the foals inside. Naomi exhaled. "She's fighting." "Yeah," Riley said. Naomi knelt near Magnolia's shoulder and began checking the mare carefully again. Her hands moved slowly, methodically, noting every detail. Riley watched. "What are you documenting?" she asked. "Everything." Naomi pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket and clicked it on. "Visible rope scarring along the left shoulder," she said into the device. "Transport rub marks near the chest. Evidence of shaved hair beneath the mane covering identification area." She glanced toward Riley. "If this turns into a legal case, I want records." Riley nodded slowly. "Paper trail," she said. "Exactly." Magnolia shifted again, her hoof scraping softly across the bedding. Naomi finished the exam and stood. "She needs quiet," she said. "Stress will make everything worse." Riley gave a tired half-smile. "Too late for that." Naomi looked toward the barn door. "You think Dale's coming back?" Riley followed her gaze. The road outside was invisible now, beyond the dark pasture. "I think he's watching," Riley said quietly. As if summoned by the thought, headlights swept across the barn wall. Both women turned. A truck rolled slowly past the end of the driveway. The same black pickup. It didn't stop. It didn't turn in. It just crawled down the road, headlights sliding across the barn siding like long white fingers before disappearing into darkness again. Naomi crossed her arms. "That's not subtle." "No," Riley said, "but it's effective." Silence returned to the barn. Then another set of footsteps approached the door. Light ones. Careful. A skinny figure appeared in the doorway, holding something in both hands. Wyatt Boone, the teenage stable kid from the auction. He stepped inside slowly, like someone entering a church after closing hours. "I brought hay," he said awkwardly. Riley blinked. "You walked here?" Wyatt shrugged. "My bike's outside." Naomi glanced at the bale he carried. "You didn't have to do that." Wyatt shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to." He set the hay near the stall and finally looked up at Magnolia. The mare watched him quietly. "She looks better," he said softly. "Barely," Riley replied. Wyatt rubbed the back of his neck. "I heard Dale talking after you left the auction." Riley's attention sharpened immediately. "What did he say?" Wyatt hesitated. Then he said, "He thought whoever bought her would send her straight to slaughter." Riley felt her jaw tighten. Wyatt continued quietly. "He said that would solve everything." Naomi and Riley exchanged a look, because that single sentence explained far more than Wyatt realized. Magnolia shifted again, her breathing heavier now. Riley stepped closer to her, placing a hand gently against the mare's neck. The giant animal leaned into the touch just slightly. Not trust, but something close. Wyatt watched the moment silently. Then he said something almost too quiet to hear. "She's not alone now." Riley didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away either. Outside, the wind returned softly across the fields. The barn creaked. The heat lamp hummed. and for the first time since Magnolia had arrived, the stall no longer felt like a place where something was dying. It felt like a place where something was being protected. Riley rested her forehead briefly against the mare's warm neck. "They want you quiet," she whispered. Magnolia's ear flicked toward her voice. Riley's hand remained steady against the mare's skin. "But you're not alone anymore." And somewhere down the dark road beyond the pasture, Dale Rusk's truck idled again, waiting, watching, hoping the giant mare inside that barn would still do what he had counted on from the beginning, die before anyone learned the truth. The next night felt heavier than the one before. The barn lights were dim except for the heat lamp glowing above Magnolia's stall. Outside, the countryside lay silent under a frozen sky, the moon hanging low and pale above the pasture. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Riley Hart hadn't left the barn in nearly 20 hours. The folding chair beside the stall had become her command post. Empty coffee cups sat on the floor beside it. Her jacket hung over the rail. The legal notice Dale had left still rested on the workbench untouched. But Riley's attention stayed on one thing: Magnolia. The giant mare stood with her head low, breath rising in slow, white clouds. Her sides trembled slightly with every exhale. Dr. Naomi Kessler crouched beside the stall gate, checking her watch. "She's close," Naomi said quietly. Riley nodded. She could see it, too. Magnolia's muscles tightened every few minutes now. The mare shifted restlessly, one hind leg lifting and setting down again. Nature was starting the process again. This time, there would be no stopping it. Wyatt Boone stood near the barn door, hands shoved deep into his pockets. The teenager looked like he hadn't slept much either. Cal Mercer leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, watching quietly. Nobody joked. Nobody talked much, because everyone in that barn understood the odds. Twin foals, weak mother, exhaustion stacked on exhaustion. The kind of math that rarely ended well. Magnolia suddenly stamped once, her massive body shuddering as the first serious contraction hit. Naomi moved instantly. "Okay," she said calmly. "Here we go." Riley stepped into the stall and placed a steady hand on Magnolia's neck. "I'm here," she murmured. The mare's ear flicked toward her voice. Another contraction followed, stronger this time. Magnolia lowered her head, legs bracing as instinct forced her body forward. Minutes stretched slowly. The barn fell silent except for the sounds of labor, breathing, shifting hooves, Naomi's quiet instructions. Then Naomi leaned forward suddenly. "I see hooves." Riley held her breath. Magnolia strained. The foal began to appear slowly, slick with birth fluid under the heat lamp's glow. "Come on, girl," Riley whispered. The mare pushed with the last strength her exhausted body could find. With a final heave, the first foal slid free and dropped into the straw. Naomi moved fast, clearing the airway, rubbing the small body firmly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the foal twitched, coughed, and drew a thin breath. Relief moved through the barn like a quiet wave. Wyatt exhaled loudly. Cal rubbed a hand over his face. Riley closed her eyes briefly. "Alive," Naomi said. But Magnolia wasn't finished. The mare groaned again. Naomi's head snapped up. "Here it comes," she said sharply. Another contraction seized Magnolia's body. The mare staggered but didn't fall. Riley held her steady. "You're okay," she whispered. "Stay with us." The second foal began to appear. Smaller, much smaller. Naomi's movements became faster now, more urgent. "Easy," she muttered. "Easy." The tiny body slid free moments later, limp at first, fragile under the lamplight. Naomi immediately began working, rubbing, clearing the airway, encouraging breath. The barn held its breath with her. Then, the foal's chest jerked. A weak cry escaped its throat. It was alive, but barely. Naomi lifted the small body slightly to clear more fluid, then paused. Her eyes narrowed. "Riley," she said slowly. Riley knelt beside her. "What?" Naomi gently turned the foal's shoulder toward the light. Under the damp newborn coat, a marking began to appear as the hair settled. A pale shape against darker fur. Not random, not ordinary. A clear star with a curved crescent beneath it. Riley stared. Her breath caught, because she had seen that symbol before. Not on a horse, on paper, on a flyer folded in the kitchen drawer she had refused to open for months. The equine therapy program for wounded veterans. Their logo, the same star and crescent. Riley felt something inside her chest shift in a way she hadn't expected. Not shock, something quieter. Recognition. Naomi looked between the foal and Riley. "You know that mark?" Riley nodded slowly. "Yes." Wyatt stepped closer, eyes wide. "Is that rare?" Naomi exhaled softly. "Very." Behind them, Magnolia lowered her head toward the newborn foals, her breath brushing gently over their damp coats. Despite exhaustion, despite pain, despite everything that had been done to her, she had brought both of them into the world alive. Cal shook his head in disbelief. Dale thought this horse was worthless. Riley stood slowly. "No," she said quietly. "He thought she'd die before anyone looked closely." And now the truth stood breathing in front of them. Days later, that truth reached the county hearing room. Naomi's documentation, the microchip records, the shaved patch hiding Magnolia's identity. Wyatt's statement about what he heard at the auction. Every piece of evidence fit together like a door finally opening. Dale Rusk sat across the room, his confidence gone. Because the plan had been simple. Sell the evidence. Let nature erase the rest. But Magnolia had survived. And survival had a way of making lies collapse. The county inspector closed the folder and looked directly at Dale. "This horse was reported stolen," he said firmly. Dale said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Weeks later, the barn looked different. Morning sunlight spilled across fresh straw. The two foals wobbled clumsily around Magnolia's legs, learning the strange miracle of standing. Riley leaned against the stall rail, watching quietly. Inside the house, the envelope from the VA finally lay open on the kitchen table. Not because Riley suddenly believed in miracles, but because something had changed. Healing didn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it arrived the same way Magnolia had. Bruised. Exhausted. Barely standing, but still alive. Riley watched the small foal with the star and crescent marking take its first steady steps. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like walking away. Because miracles weren't lightning strikes. They were quieter than that. Sometimes they arrived for $1 and changed everything.